Hello and happy Easter. Today we continue in the great week or octave of Easter. And the gospel the church gives us to consider today is a very powerful one that's very dear to my heart, both as a disciple and also as a priest. It comes to us from the Gospel of St. John. After Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he revealed himself in this way. Simon, Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, "I am going fishing." They said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the beach. Yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, have you any fish?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in for the quantity of fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his clothes, for he was stripped for work, and sprang into the sea. But the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off. When they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire there, with fish lying on it, and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. We hear today about another encounter between the risen Jesus and his disciples. And there seems to be a pattern building here. Jesus appears, the person there or the people don't realize it's Jesus right away, and then there's some action or some dialogue that opens their eyes to see that it's Jesus. But let's just go through this gospel a little more slowly to really understand the power that it captures, that it holds. First, we're told that Peter and the other disciples are back up at the Sea of Galilee. Now that's a term that we hear a lot, a location that's often in the Gospels, the Sea of Galilee. It's in the north of present Israel. It's the area where Jesus grew up, was raised, where he called his first disciples. In fact, we remember well, that's how Peter, James, and John and the rest of them were called. Many of them were fishermen, and they worked at the Sea of Galilee. So at first it doesn't seem odd that they'd be back there. Peter says, "I am going fishing." Now what's odd about that, when we stop to consider it, is that Peter was no longer a fisherman. About 3 years prior, Jesus had seen him and his brother, Andrew, and he said, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." And then for a few years, Peter did just that. He followed Jesus. And as a result, he, like the other disciples, was sent out at times to go and to preach and prepare the way for Jesus. And then Peter, in a very singular way, was called out from among the 12, the apostles, and was commissioned to be the first among them. He was often the one who would speak up when no one else would. He was the first to say, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Now, Peter's story is very much like our own. The best of intentions, great zeal, but also, he's human. He has faults. He doesn't always follow through, even with the best of intentions. We know that Peter denied even knowing Jesus the night he was betrayed by Judas and handed over to the authorities, to the religious authorities, placed on trial and then handed over to the governor, to Pilate. And amid all that, Peter faltered. But then, he was redeemed by Jesus. Jesus appeared to him and to the others, and in doing so, he revealed his mercy and his compassion. So again, back to Peter saying, I'm going fishing. What's wrong with that statement is he's not a fisherman anymore. He's changed. He's different. He's not who he once was. He's going back, as it were. He's going back to a former way of life that isn't properly his. His job isn't to fish anymore. It's to catch souls, to bring people to Jesus. He goes back to an old way of life. I'm speaking to you right now from the confessional here at St. Gerard's, this very sacred room. You know, when we think of a parish church, we often think of where the pews are and the altar and the tabernacle and the stained glass windows and all that, and rightly so, because that is probably the part that most people know about a church or think of about a church. But every church somewhere has a space set aside for the sacrament of reconciliation. This is a very sacred space. It's sacred for those who are coming to confess their sin, and it's a very sacred one for me as a priest. You know, so often in our lives as disciples, we have the best of intentions, we set out on a journey, and then something happens, and we start to fall apart. We start to break down a bit. And yes, our actions can sometimes be in an opposite direction of what we want. We sin. And all during our Lenten journey, we were considering those ways in which we do fall short of the mark, the ways that we are imperfect, that we don't live the way we want to. Kind of like Peter, we go back to an old way of life, something that we promised ourselves we weren't going to go to anymore, something we had promised God that we turn away from for good. But we mess up. We go back because we're human. But God doesn't let us stay there. No, he comes to us whenever we call out to him. When Jesus realized that it was Jesus, he's so excited, he jumps into the water and swims to the shoreline. The other guys stay in the boat and, just take it in, but not Peter. He sees and realizes it's Jesus and swims to him. That's what we're meant to do when we realize we're not where we ought to be. We're meant to go back to Jesus. And for us, as Catholics, we place such a high premium on this sacrament of reconciliation. This is the opportunity for us right here to confess, not to a priest, but really to Christ, to tell him those ways in which we have fallen short, in which we've reverted back to our former way of life, and to know that we are going to be met with mercy and compassion. Another facet of this gospel that people often find intriguing is the detail that St. John gives us about the fish. We're told there were 153 different types of fish, large fish. It makes you wonder, did they get there and start counting them and as they pulled them out of the net? Scholars will tell us that at the time the Gospels were constructed, it was believed that there were 153 types or species of fish. In other words, that net that Peter, the rock, the first pope, as we say, that net that he cast into the sea catches everyone. In other words, the gospel that we have is meant to be shared with everyone. The gospel of Christ is for everyone. It's easy for us to think as Christians that, yes, the gospel is for us, and indeed it is, but the gospel is for everyone. You and I are called to be evangelists, to let others know about Christ, to share the good news. The gospel is for everyone. The church is for everyone. And the net doesn't break. Why? Because there's no limit to this church. There's no limit to its size. There's no limit to its cultures or its languages. Up and down the centuries, the church is there for everyone. I'm so proud of the institutions within the Catholic Church, like Catholic Charities and Catholic Health Services. We stand at the foreground of so many different ways of helping people. We see it right now in the mid of this pandemic. Catholic Relief Services and Catholic Charities and Catholic Health Services on the front lines, helping everyone, regardless of whatever faith tradition they come from or not. The gospel is for everyone. The good news is for all people. You and I get to be ministers of that. And even though we are ministers, we also need to be healed, which is precisely why we have this moment, this opportunity to come to the sacrament of reconciliation. It's a chance for us to set back on the right path. So if we find ourselves going in the other direction, going back to that former way of life, like Peter, we can look to Christ and say, Lord, forgive me, and know in confidence that we are met with mercy and compassion. And then, like we've been hearing all week, when we encounter the risen Christ, we're not meant to keep it to ourselves, but to go out and share that good news, the news of mercy and compassion and forgiveness, to share that news with everyone we encounter. The gospel we hear today challenges us, and also, I hope, uplifts us. That when we find ourselves lost, when we find ourselves having slipped back, our God comes to us. He's the God of second chances and third chances, and as many as it takes. He never, ever tires, ever, from offering forgiveness. So take advantage of that. Go to Him during this Easter season, realizing that we'll never quite be perfect on the side of life, but God will work with us until we reach the joys of heaven. With Peter and all the saints who have gone before us, to be caught up in that net of the church triumphant in heaven.